Hello and welcome to the next part of the Finishing What I Started Christmas quilt series that I'm doing. As you can see, I've now got to the stage where I've got one border onto the quilt. I'm now going to measure and see if I've got enough of the piano key border that I made to go around the whole thing. I think there is. I think there might be more than that. So I'm now going to measure that up and get that on. So here you can see that I've just unrolled the piano key border and laid it out. There's the roll there. Laid it out just to see if there's enough, and there is. There might even be a bit left over, and I quite like how that looks. So I'm now going to stitch that on. So here it is now with the piano key border attached. The paper is still in the border, so that will be another job to sit and pull the paper off. That doesn't take too long, it's not as bad as it sounds. So now the next stage is for me to go and find something to back it with. I don't really want to buy any more for this quilt, I just want to use what I've got. And there are no two ways about it, little Luna loves this quilt. Okay, so this massive expanse of white will be the backing for the quilt. So I didn't have a big enough piece with any pattern on it, which was a shame, but I had this white piece which was almost, well, sort of just over half the width. So I've seamed it up the middle. I've laid it out. I have ironed it, but now it doesn't look like it. And I'm going to make my quilt sandwich, which means you put your backing down, your wadding or batting that you're going to use in the middle, and your quilt on top, and you fasten them together. When I do this, I like to use a glue, a temporary fabric glue called 505 that comes in a spray can, because it's just quick and straightforward. So this is down. I'm going to quickly run the iron over it again. Then I'm going to add the batting. So here is here's the wadding laid out. I've got some wrinkles to sort between Luna's interest and my lack of space. I'm not going to get a wrinkle-free back to this quilt. I mean, it's not easy anyway, and I've got this little munchkin, and you know, I'm not working in ideal conditions. That's fine. You know, before I started this, those quilt blocks were in a carrier bag in a plastic tub. I mean, I'd much rather they were a quilt, so you just do what you have to do. I can smooth it as I go with the glue, smoothing it down. So now I just have to lay the top on top. Try and keep Luna from tearing it to pieces before I get there. Actually, she hasn't torn anything. She just likes to jump about on it, I think. Right, so as you can see now, I've got the 3 layers laid out. I just need to trim this edge of the excess backing and wadding. Always buy too much. You need to leave a good edge around the edge of the quilt because things move as you're quilting it. So you want edge to some space on the edge to allow for the shifting. So I'm just going to trim that up this edge now. So here we are. It's trimmed all around. Now it's a matter of being on the hands and knees and gluing the layers together with the 505, which is this stuff. Gonna help me, Luna? I don't think you'll like the hissing of the can, will you? No? So this is me partway through gluing down the layers. I roll up the layers, spray 505 on about a foot, and then press it down and smooth it out as I go. I'm not sure if that's the way everyone does it, but it works for me. Right, so I'm planning on machine quilting this quilt with a free motion foot on my machine. So I've just made myself up a little practice sandwich because with free motion quilting you do need, it's a different way of moving your hands and controlling the foot pedal on the machine. So and I don't do it often enough just to be able to jump right in. So a little practice is required. That's just a squiggle there that I've done. I'm thinking of just doing random on the quilt because it's quite busy and there are lots of triangles, and I think, you know, I want this quilt finished, so I think that would probably be the easiest way to get it finished. I sit at my machine, I turn my machine on its side and sit at my machine, so I'm looking at it like this, and that just helps me see what I'm doing. I have more space for having quilt rolled up on either side of my machine. It just seems to work out better for me. I don't know if it does for others, but for me it works. I will try and video some for you. It could be wobbly and it will be noisy, but I will try that now. So here I am. You can see my free motion foot there. To use this, you need to drop the feed dogs on your machine, so the motion is very fluid. And to do it, you need to keep a fast needle and move your hands slowly. It's very different from doing general everyday stitching. So it's going to be noisy, but you'll see that I keep the needle fast and I move my hands fairly slowly. I think you can see why I feel like I always need to practice a little before I start doing this on the quilt. When I first learnt this, we were taught to write our name, and that's kind of what you have to do. You have to look at the needle a bit like it's a pen. I mean, I'm just scribbling. I'll probably try and do something more uniform on the quilt. Curves I expect, but I'm going to have an experiment and I'll show you when I'm finished. That's a bit noisy for you to watch for very long. Okay, so I've had a little play. I know that my machine is set up correctly. The stitches are coming through well at the back of the sandwich as well as at the top. Obviously I won't be doing it in white on the quilt. That was just so I could see what I was doing here. And I think I'm liking this sort of loopy meander. And I think that's probably what I'm going to do over the body of the quilt, a loopy meander. It's pretty, it'll get it quilted close enough, and it's just general and it won't distract from any of the fabrics or the angles that are actually on the quilt. I'm going to do it in a green that is very close to this main colour. I was potentially going to use red because there's a lot of red in the quilt as well, but I just don't have enough thread, so I'm going to go for the green. So I'm going to get that set up. So after a lot of work and the death of one sewing machine, luckily I had a spare, the quilting is done on the quilt. So, I mean, it's not the best quilting in the world. I did it fairly heavily, as you can see. So now the last stage is to bind the edges. As you can see, they're not bound yet. So that is where I'll be going to. This quilting felt like forever. You know, I work, but it had to have been 4 days in total with, you know, all day. But it's done now, and it wasn't easy with having to swap machines halfway through, but I don't think you can tell. The quilting isn't the best It's pretty raggedy in some places, but it's heavily quilted. Those stitches aren't coming out. So that's pretty good. Last stage to happen now. So in order to bind the quilt, I've just cut more 2.5 inch strips of the green. This is a bit wider than most people use, but I think it's a big quilt. It needs a binding that will show. 2.5 inch strips, and they get folded in half like that. So you're using them double. I will show you in a second. So what happens when you're binding your quilt, you take your strip and you fold it in half and you stitch your raw edges to the raw edge of the quilt, leaving 1/4 inch seam. When you get to the corner, you stop 1/4 inch before the edge of the quilt, so probably about here. You pick that up, fold it a little triangle, and then carry on down and make your angle. This will then leave you a mitre which you can neatly wrap around after, because once that is all stitched on, you simply fold it back and hand stitch it to the back. I'll show you when I get to that stage though. So I thought I'd just record a video of doing the corner. I've tried to record it once, but I couldn't get it to show on the camera, so I'm hoping that you can see this a bit better now. So I am about 1/4 inch away from the edge of the quilt. I'm going to lift my presser foot and turn my needle, pointing towards the corner of the quilt. And I'm just going to sew straight off that corner and then cut my threads. Then I'm going, so I've got my stitching going along here and then a sort of corner there. So I'm now going to turn the quilt so that I've got the other edge ready to be sewed. Excuse me. And I'm going to lift my binding, lift my binding up at an angle so that I've got a point there. Can you see? I folded it so I've got an angle like that towards the corner, and then I'm going to just lay it back down, holding that corner in place, as you can see there. And I'm going to make sure I know where my edge is, pop it back under the needle, missing the edge, and continue with my stitching. That will then later give us a mitre that we can open up and wrap around the quilt. So here I am, very nearly at the end of sewing my strips onto the quilt. Here's the bit that just needs to have some sewn on it, and here are the last 2 pieces of my binding that need to join neatly. So in order to join them neatly, you just take one side, it doesn't really matter which, make a nice neat fold like this, lay it on the quilt and lay one inside the other. Make sure that they will fold out neatly for each other, and then you just, I like to clip it, and then you just sew all the way down there, and that's your binding joined at the end. So now it's time to hand sew the back edge of the binding down. You can see that you've got all this binding sitting to the front of your quilt, it's not covering anything yet. So you just lift it up, smooth it out, fold the folded edge over all along. Keep it straight, especially when you get to the corner, because you want to have a neat mitre on both sides. And do the mitre, you literally meet it like that, just like that. Make it meet and get clipping. Now, a lot of people sew these all sorts of ways. I prefer to hand sew them to the back, and you will end up with a quilt with a border on it like that. And so here we are, a lot of hand sewing later. We have a finished quilt. It's really hard for me to show it to you fully. There we go, that's a bit better. It is quite large. There we are. It would probably just cover a single bed, maybe not fully. It's not perfect, it's far from perfect. The quilting isn't great, the piecing, the corners don't match in a lot of places. But it's finished. It's a lot better than a load of blocks left in a carrier bag. So I'm quite pleased that it's finished. It will probably go on the back of the sofa for Christmas. I do have a lot of scraps left over, which I'll probably make cushions or something extra out of, but not today. It's finished and that's enough for today. So thank you for watching.